Hi, my name is Rob Lawrence, and this video is designed to show how state funding, and in particular how K through 12 state funding works. Okay, so this diagram, very complex, you can get it at roblawrence.blogspot.com, shows where we get our money from, what we spend it on, and how it relates in the big picture to K-12 education funding. So, the state generates, and this is surprising to most people, approximately $44 billion a year. Now, the biggest funding source for us is actually a return of our federal tax dollars. We get about $15 billion from the federal government to support programs in the state. Now, what's interesting is that we've been a donor state for decades, and as a matter of fact, this represents about $1.7 billion less than what we send to Washington. Now, interestingly, states like Alabama have been net recipient states for decades, and they get about $1.5 billion more than what they send. So Alabama's been living off our tax dollars. You've got other sources here. 4% sales and use tax goes directly to K-12 funding. The balance goes to fund other programs. But you can see the sources from highest to lowest here. Some of them are completely dedicated. The 6 mil education tax goes to K-12. And other components of these things go to different areas. The lottery, $850 million, goes to support school funding. So let's back up here and take a look at what the approved budget is for 2008 and 9. You can see here K-12 is the biggest component. That's $13.38 billion. That grew by 3.7%. A lot of that's an illusion because it represents the echo of the housing boom. That number is going to start going down as the economy goes south and home values continue to drop, so that's going to be troubling. You've got community health, another actually troubling item in the budget because it's growing faster than any other segment of the budget, and it's very difficult to control. You've got all of these other components of the budget. Many of them are proscribed by set funding mechanisms. And let's talk about corrections for a second, because this item, $2 billion, represents the single biggest discretionary item that the legislature controls. And why is that? Well, because of this $43.8 billion, the legislature really only controls $9.7 billion. So this number here is a huge chunk of the discretionary items that they can spend money on, and that's why it gets so much press. Another troubling item, higher education and community education, that continues to go backwards in terms of funding. You see all these blue ovals here. These represent decreases in funding over last year. You see the legislature here, they've kept their funding level. That keeps the House and Senate open. But you see that they're making cuts. Unfortunately, they're going to have to completely rethink how they do government in the state of Michigan to make any headway. Let's go take a look over at school aid and see what this all means. One of the things that is interesting about school aid is that the state talks about a foundation allowance of $7,316 per student. But we really get approximately $6,080 per student. Why is that? Because for every foundation dollar that the state says we get, the state offsets dollar for dollar every penny collected under this 18 mil non-homestead tax. So local taxes are subsidizing what the state says they give us. It's part of Prop A. It's been there from the beginning. Other categorical spending. Now this is interesting. You've got $1,256 per student. This represents programs like school lunch programs, vocational education, ISD operations, $29 million for meat testing. Those are very targeted and specific funding programs. There's no discretion in those. They have to be spent on those programs, so it really doesn't go into the classroom. You've also got about $892 per student, and that's the 1.6 million students for special education. That represents about $1.5 billion. Some of that is federal funding. There needs to be more of that, but most of it is state funding. And much of this number actually comes out of operating budgets. Special education requires a lot of resources, and it comes out of school districts' general operating funds. So, what does this all mean for local school districts? Well, one of the things that's interesting about all of this is that you wind up with a situation where the state has said you get a foundation allowance, but you've got all these expenses to take care of, and one of the biggest is the pension contribution. The state mandates what our contribution is. Currently, it's about $980 per student. That comes straight out of the foundation allowance left for kids because the state doesn't give us an increase when they demand an increase. Why is it a problem? Because the state pension fund in and of itself is underfunded as of last year to the tune of nearly $31 billion. And that's of September 07. September 08, the market was down about 22% between these two time periods. This number is going to get bigger. So you wind up with an unfunded pension liability, principally in healthcare, of $24 billion, and the balance is in the pension benefit, which is constitutionally guaranteed and protected. That's fine. But the healthcare benefit is the one that is going to wind up tanking every school district in the state of Michigan. So that's what needs to get fixed. And even the state recognizes that, we're spending $1.6 billion and sending it to the pension fund. It needs to be $3.4 billion. And that's right in their financial statements. So this problem is only going to get worse. So call your legislators, tell them to start working on this.